1, 2, 3, check testing, nothing that we're on. You want to joining us for our 6 o'clock planning board meeting. We're in spacious police station. Come on down. I think we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Yes, 6 o'clock at board members, the board business, we're meeting private, private bills will be,
So we have no new bills, but minutes of the April 4th meeting, the draft has been posted. We spare the reasons.
there's only, yeah.
Very.
Can we hold off on another look?
Can I mention one thing though? I did have a chance to read it and it looks like the sequence of events is turned around. It's the one that talks about it. I'll talk to you about it afterwards, but the sequencing is out of order.
I'll take a look.
Okay.
Okay. And you said no bills, correct?
Correct.
All right, we have an issue before us that I wanted to address from a planning board standpoint. It has to do with code of conduct of planning board members, not only towards each other, but towards the applicants who are before us. In 2008, the select board enacted a code of conduct. They expect everyone in the town to adhere to. We have a copy of what our code of conduct should be. I want to go back to the meeting we had on April 4th. Was it 4th? Oh, it seems like so long ago, and address some of the things that came up in that meeting that were unconscionable or offensive to not only myself, but I think the rest of the board. We have a letter that we wrote that we would like to read as public record. We also have a letter from the attorney for Sanctuary, Peter Journey. I do not want to read it. It's available. It was sent to the town, expressing their outrage and concern about how that meeting was run. And I want to address the issues that were presented there and make sure that moving forward, we don't have meetings like that again. So, like I said, we wrote a letter and I think we should probably read it, which, sure.
So this was prepared on the behalf of the 4 planning board members that were subject to their comments at the last meeting. I want to remind you all that the town of Littleton, and though it says I, it really is referring to this. I want to remind you all that the town of Littleton through the Board of Selectmen adopted a code of conduct and ethics on November 17, 2008. Pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 268A, Section 23C, the Code of Ethics requires, among other things, that all members of a board shall remember that they represent the town of Littleton at all times. Treat all members of the board with respect, despite differences of opinion. Conduct themselves so as to maintain public confidence in their local government and in the performance of the public trust. At our last meeting, a heated discussion ensued concerning the application of sanctuary. During that discussion, one of the board members made the comment, "Why do my peers protect sanctuary? Maybe one day we'll find out." The clear intention of that statement, lacking any foundation or proof, was to suggest to the public that fellow board members might be guilty of improper influence. Members of this planning board take great offense to such an insinuation. Each of the members on this board takes their duties as elected officials seriously and with great attention to the information provided by applicants before the board, as well as all the butters' concerns. We are insulted and harmed by this public and unfounded accusation, and we are requesting an apology. The statement reflects malevolent poor judgment by the board member who made it not only for maligning the character of decent elected volunteers, but also for putting the board in a light that erodes the public confidence in the work of this board. Further, during the same hearing, the same board member called the applicant a liar and personally attacked the applicant and its legal representative, exposing the town and this board to potential legal action for character assault and defamation. That also violated code of ethics obligation to conduct oneself to maintain public confidence in local government. I call for an apology on the record, but I would like to remind all of the board members that applicants before us are due courtesy and respect. They are not to be name called or bullied. We may differ in our opinions as board members, but we are each entitled to a vote without accusation or disparagement by our fellow board members when we disagree. We are first and foremost ambassadors for the town of Littleton, and we owe it to the public to conduct a professional, responsible, and deliberative hearing without animosity toward one another, or toward the applicant before us. And that's the comments about the list.
So, and following up on that, like I said, we have a letter from Birds and Levinson requesting a public apology, which I think they are owed. And also just the conduct moving forward. We're not going to tolerate that kind of abuse by a fellow board member. Not only that, but also trying to take over. And we're supposed to be doing what's best for the town, not what each individual thinks is best or anything else. It's what's best for the town as a whole. Our opinions are our opinions, and they shouldn't shape what goes on at the town. We should take in the information, decipher it, and make what we think is the best judgments. Putting the town at risk, like you did, for the potential of a lawsuit, for the potential of just trying to show how we try to work with everyone else, I think was put us in a very bad light. And I don't think I speak for myself. I think I speak for all of us. We're not going to put up with that. And bad behavior is bad behavior, and we're not going to put up with it. So we expect an apology to the board members and to the applicant from you. And moving forward, we're not going to tolerate that kind of behavior. I think I speak for all of us. Are you in agreement with Lisa?
Yes, I am.
Jeff?
Yes.
And I spoke with Bob before he left. He said at the very least, he felt the apology was owed to not only us, but the applicant as well for your behavior at the last meeting. You want to say something? We'll give you a moment to say something, then we're going to move on.
I have nothing further to say about that topic. I would agree that the planning board should adopt a code of conduct and ethics that we now sign. So I look forward to.
No, time out here. We all live by our code of ethics. You did not.
Mr. Chair,
No,
Mr. Chair,
no,
I have been bullied plenty. on
no,
this board,
absolutely not.
especially in the last couple of months. So, like I said, I have nothing further to say, and I have nothing further to say. When the applicant receives a special permit, they need to move on.
No.
Mark,
What?
I think Ms. Eustace made it very evident. She has no intention of apologizing to the board members or to the applicant. So let's just let it rest and let's just move on.
Okay, moving forward, we'll deal with it as we deal with it in the planning board. Okay.
Yeah. Let's do what they want to do.
Thank you. I'm gonna take things out of order real quick because our consultant, Emily, needs to get out of here as quick as possible. So can we do the MBTA communities thing right off the bat? And then we'll deal with 245 Foster afterwards. If everyone's okay with that. You okay? You asked me to do it, aren't you okay?
No, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to judge this. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Mr. Chair, is this a continued public hearing? Do we need to do anything about that?
So
Well,
technically,
it's not.
it's not a public hearing because notice was not properly given. The Lowell Sun never did publish the notice that they confirmed. So we're going to have to advertised, we have re-advertised, the public hearing for May 2nd. But since it was posted as a continued hearing, I would suggest that we go forward with the conversation tonight.
An informal discussion about it.
Just move forward with the conversation. It's just recent, just the other, yes, 2 days ago that we figured out the notice problem.
Okay.
Given we have an audience, suggest that we.
So for the record, Emily Ennis of Ennis Associates, we are the consultant that has been assisting the board of the town with finding a compliant path for the MBTA Communities Act. I want to thank the board for allowing me to go first. I'm actually double booked tonight with another MBTA Communities. As we approach town meeting, there's a lot of these meetings, so thank you for your flexibility. I do have the presentation that we would be using for town meeting. You have seen 99% of it. I think the only changes are we did add a list. You just want to keep flipping through more and I'll stop there. We did add a list talking about the things that the planning board has been doing in order to have these conversations in your regular public forum. We also have the workshop in March and the follow-up public survey. And it says public hearing because this was done before I heard about the Lowell Sun, but clearly you are continuing to have these public discussions.
So before you, our public hearing, the one that we posted is going to be May 1st. Is that what it's
Thursday, May 2nd,
Thursday, May 2nd at
6:15 and in the,
103?
yeah.
So I will add that to that slide. And just note that the select board and the finance committee has also followed your vote to recommend this article. You want to start flipping forward a little bit more. So you've seen the information. None of this has changed about what Littleton's requirements are, the zoning, the King Street Village Common, talked about that at the last meeting. There's the map of the parcels. So your two-part strategy with this area is really providing most of your unit capacity, most of your acreage. But we do still need, it is required that you have something within the station area, which is a half-mile radius. So Mara, if you flip forward. So those are the puzzle pieces that we have for the King Street Village Common area. And you can see we're almost at the 50 acres. We're well above the dwelling units per acre. What that allows us to do is, in listening to the board and listening to the community at the March 19th meeting, is drive down as much as possible the density around the station area to be responsive to the existing development pattern in that area and neighborhood concerns. So if you want to flip over, please. There are some minor adjustments to King Street Common. I think we've talked about them before, rounding down for the affordability requirement and bringing the criteria for wetlands and floodplain regulation and the aquifer and water resource district in as site plan review criteria under your site plan review rather than as a special permit. The special permit you have heard is not going to be allowed by HLC, but you are free to move the criteria to site plan review. Next, please. So part two is the Littleton Station area. We've talked about this in the past, but if you want to jump forward slide. So this is just zooming in on the area so people can see the parcels that we're discussing, 305 and 295 Foster Street. We've identified it by block and map number. Next slide, please. This is the proposed zoning. It's the zoning that's in the draft article. The only real change here is when we did the last model that you saw, 295 Foster and 305 Foster had different maximum dwelling units per acre in the test. We made them the same for this, and the reason is that way you don't have to have two separate sub-districts in the zoning for Littleton Station. It's just one sub-district that covers both. And you can see separately how the two of those work together. You've got more than enough acres. You needed over 10. The other thing is the last model you saw, 305 Foster, because we had modeled it separately as a 10 acre. There was a very small parcel that was attached to it. It was 215 Taylor. We removed that. Yes. So it's just 305 Foster. That's why the acres will look different. 295 Foster. And we just changed the maximum dwelling units per acre. Next slide. The zoning, it's a new overlay district for the two parcels. So the base underlying zoning, the industrial zoning remains IA. We're allowing multifamily as of right based on the dimensional standards you saw, but there are additional dimensional standards such as setbacks. We heard concern about, buildings maybe being too big, so we limited the building size to no more than 12 dwelling units per building. In an effort to bring the scale down, understanding that there would be more than one building per lot, that again gets you to, the compliance requirements. Established a site plan review process specific to this overlay and development standards for the planning board's review. And it allows the planning board to, add design guidelines at a later date. And then we added the 10% affordability at 80% area median income. Next slide, please. So this is the key slide for you all, is to see how 295 and 305 Foster, as you voted was your last meeting, work with the King Street Common and the Village Common. You're well above your 50 acres. You're well above your units. Again, that's mostly coming from the existing zoning at King Street and Village Common. We're not changing that zoning at all. When plugged into the compliance model, it essentially, reports out an estimate of the unit capacity based on the existing zoning. The only changes were the two I mentioned earlier. 295 and 305 Foster, you put them together and you get that. You can see the original density for King Street Village Common is about 23 units per acre. We've now brought it to 16.76. You meet your acres within the station area, meet your units within the station area, and more importantly, because in some of the pre-approval letters, when HLC has been looking at the compliance models, they have in some cases reduced the unit capacity, which therefore reduces the density. We have a cushion here. So when this goes to HLC, if they say, no, we think the compliance model should go a different way, and we've seen that, you do have room for them to reduce something without having to come back to town meeting. So, and again, that compliance model is that mathematical exercise to give an estimate of unit capacity. Doesn't necessarily mean, it's not a straight line relationship to what could be built on the site. And that I believe is the last slide. Yes.
Great. Well, do you have any questions or concerns? Even though this is just an informal, we'll be doing this again.
I have a couple comments. Compliance model.
Yes.
I have had comments from people going, well, I can do the math myself and these numbers don't, add up. What's the story?
So the compliance model takes information from two main sources. The first source is a geographic information database, GIS system. And the database was created by the state, and it has certain specific layers in it. So it has parcel layers, but it also has a layer called excluded land and a layer called sensitive land. And excluded land, you can't model the unit capacity on that land. So if you're taking a parcel of, say, 10 acres and applying the 15 dwelling units per acre, you would expect to see 150 units. But if you've got excluded land within that, you can't model the excluded land. So if two of that's excluded, that's not included. So 15 units per acre is going to be on the 8 units rather than the 10. So that's throwing a lot of people off. The other thing, and it's not an issue as much in Littleton, but some communities have districts where they've got rights of way within the district. That's also modeled with the excluded land. So I've seen people take out parcels and say, well, I've got 5 parcels here and your math's not adding up when I look at the total district. It's because you have to include the right of ways, but that's not been an issue for you. So part of it is that excluded land that's going to throw it off if they're just looking at the assessor's database or the online GIS and pulling numbers, that they won't have the layer that has the excluded land calculation. When that information is brought into the model, it's brought in on a single worksheet. The information from the GIS is just copied into that worksheet and the formula is automatically applied to it. The second section of information is the zoning criteria, and that is pulled from either your existing zoning, as we did in King Street or Village Common, or it's from the tests that we did. So it's a community saying, hey, I'd like the parcel size to be this, I'd like the parking to be that, I'd like the height to be this. And those iterations that we did was us inputting various scenarios and to see what would work and what wouldn't. The checklist that's used there asks for a lot of different types of information because communities historically use a lot of different controls to either create an incentive for or reduce the amount of development on the lot. Not all of those controls fit into a model. So I've had people say, well, the setbacks do this and the setbacks do that, and so you can't get this. The setbacks don't actually feed into the model calculation, and there's a couple of others like that. There's a mathematical reason that they don't, but the upshot is that somebody who's maybe sketching something out on a parcel themselves, they're not necessarily going to get what's into the model because it's not working the way they expect. So we've gotten people who are like, oh, well, I did a fit study and it should be this, but it's not that. So it's important to remember that the model was a way for HLC to be able to estimate across 177 cities and towns with multiple zoning districts like each, a general capacity to understand whether or not the zoning applies. But there's so much that goes into the model. Topography is one. The parcel shape, which is not something that can be modeled, is another. For example, there's so much that goes into it that could reduce the amount that actually goes on a lot. So it's important to understand that. And then there's all the other development factors like financing, what the market demand is, where we are in the market cycle, whether or not there's even people in the area who can build it, developer capacity for building units. So there's a lot that goes into lack of production there. That's a key issue for the model in terms of why somebody looking at the parcels might not get the same result.
Next, numbers. One other, so when you looked at the, and I know you're creating a number that, well, part of the 550 king is a number. We have
Yes.
permitted them so many units and they are intending to build those units. The additional site, the old Yangtze River site, 80 units, how did that come out? I mean, it's advantageous to us because of our, and I understand that.
Right.
But at town meeting, people will look and I go, oh my God, there are going to be 80 units on that site. What do we say?
Right. So again, it's the message is if I plug these parameters in, and that's what it comes out with. The model is designed. So
the model looked at that site. It's a simple square site.
doesn't even matter if it's square.
Okay.
So I think that's an important thing. It just starts off with how many square feet are on the site, right? It translates the acres to square feet. So how many square feet is, and then actually it is a rectangle. So let's do the rectangle, right? First thing it does, it takes off excluded land. So you can't build on that. Then it takes off open space calculation. Can't build on that. Then it takes off parking. Can't build on that. And that leaves the box. And the box is the building footprint. You multiply by the building footprint by the number of stories. Now you've got the building volume. You divide that building volume by 1,000. That's your number of units.
So you were aggressive on that. But once again, in my view, yes, great. I mean, we've already had a developer presentation. There's nowhere near 80 units going to be built on that site. But for the purposes of the state analysis, it gets our density, it enables our density to be lower on the others on the station site.
Exactly. And that was one of the key reasons, I think, as I understand the request back to us to add the village common to King Street is, if you put those together, what does that look like in terms of unit capacity and density? Does that allow us to drive down? And the answer is yes, it did allow you to drive down, and that was the goal. So I'd say it's working in your favor. But to your point, and I think this is where HLC in the pre-approval letters that I've seen in some communities, they're saying, we see that's what the model tells you, but we're a little concerned that it's not going to get to that level. So that's why I say having a cushion. Yes, it's always possible to go back to town meeting, but it's much easier if town meeting passes it and HLC says, this works.
So our hope is that this is kind of when we send this to the governor's office, is that it's going to be like, for lack of a better word, the way the gun bylaw. They came back with tweaks to it. We didn't have to go to town meeting.
Yes.
We got tweaks to it. We fixed it, and then we're in compliance. So that's what you're trying to do.
Right,
Just so that
exactly.
everybody
Get you as
understands.
close as possible so that what goes to town meeting is, maybe there's a letter that says we should reduce that, or there's a change here, but it's not anything that requires you to go back to town meeting. That is the goal, is just once.
So back to numbers.
Yes,
We ended up on the designated parcels in the stationary with 181. We were trying to get to 150.
yes.
And is that reflective of the actual size of the parcels or?
So that came out of what I call a stress test. So what I did was I had the two parcels in the compliance model. And I said it'd be really helpful if we could have them both at the same dwelling units per acre restriction. They're quite large parcels, 10 acres, 30 acres. The model tends to be a little high on that. You know, if I had taken that 6 dwelling units per acre restriction off, I don't think anybody would have liked that, including potentially HLC. There were a lot of units. So the question becomes, okay, how do we get it as low as possible? So at 6 dwelling units per acre, if I went down to 5, because I wanted it to be whole numbers, 5 was too low. I'd have to go back and see which ones I tested, but 5 was too low. So 6 was the lowest restriction I could get that didn't dip them below 149 units. And then the rest is the math of the parcels themselves. So. And I am happy.
Well,
run through
You're
them
going to
all,
be
yes.
doing this at town meeting. I mean, just think about that.
I can show it to, town meeting live if they want to see it,
I
but it's not.
Personally, I'm not
necessarily
interested in
fun,
that,
yeah.
but there may be people who are.
And, if the board thinks maybe not showing the model live, but I could break out, so here are the inputs, here are the outputs, so people can see that. If that's of use to town meeting, I want to, knowing town meeting's time, I want to be protective of their time, but I also want to make sure they have more information. We could also issue the same thing as an FAQ. I found with the model that sometimes it's more confusing than helpful,
Oh,
but yeah.
absolutely.
If it's useful, I'm happy to provide that information. We did at the workshop that we did and your meeting after that, we did provide you with the stress test. That was the parcels that were in blue and then green, and it showed, okay, if you drop the units per acre, the dwelling units per acre by 1, it doesn't work anymore. So it was that same sort of stress test.
So one more number question.
Of course.
The 2 parcels have different are allowed dwelling units per acre.
They're the same now. They're
Oh,
the same.
good.
Yes, I made them the same because otherwise you would have had to do each as a separate sub-district and that.
Okay, I don't think that was reflected on your slide. Could you go back to that slide?
If you back to the zoning one. Yeah, there you go. They're both at 6 now.
Well, one says 6.7 and one says.
So that's the result. It's
Okay,
the-
explain.
Okay, so the result of the.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Over.
Yeah, it's under proposed.
On the left.
Oh, okay, that's okay, so I'm looking at the
Text.
so in terms of a slide, maybe that's not the best.
I don't have to put them next to
Yeah.
each other. I was trying to reduce the number of.
Yeah, but then we're looking at the
Yes.
table.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And then when that's translated into the zoning bylaw proposal itself, it's 6.
It's 6 in the bylaw, yes.
And I have a good question. If I
Oh,
may,
yeah, go ahead.
on this particular slide. So what you were referencing earlier about the excluded lands and doing the math at 295 Foster Street, that has a couple of acres that are excluded.
Right.
I believe because of the wetlands. So I couldn't make the math work and then I remembered the excluded. So when you submit this to the state, you use the 20.2, not the excluded. They then take that out.
So what the state gets, it's an excellent question. The state gets the compliance model fully filled out. There's some extraneous information I haven't put in yet because it wasn't required. They get the compliance model, they get the GIS shape files, so they can reproduce exactly what we're looking at, and they get the zoning. And there's application letters and other narrative materials that are required that talks about why you did what you did. But our goal for them is they should be able to reproduce exactly what we did when they did the zoning. So they'll see all of those numbers.
Anybody else? Any other question? Just name, please, for the record.
Open meeting,
Okay. Address?
Sami Aston 4 Julian Way. My question is, you may have covered this before, but can you go over the guidelines one more time, the number of units required?
Oh,
And
yes, of
also,
course. With that. Mhm.
Maybe a definition of 10%, 80%, what do you mean by that?
Happy,
Where do we start?
yeah, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So, all right, so these are the numerical requirements. The minimum land area is 50 acres. I think as I was turned this way, more of you came in, so my apologies. The minimum land area required is 50 acres. There's a number of acres within the station area is 10, so that's 20%. Minimum contiguous district size. We don't talk about this, but just so you know, the King Street Village Common together as one district more than meets it. But you either have, you have to have 50% of the total district size. So your minimum is 25 if you only have 50 acres. You have more than that, a little bit more than that, but you're fine. Minimum unit capacity is 750 units. And I'll stop here and say that HLC has a website online that has all of this information, including how they derived these calculations. But the minimum capacity is 750, 20% of that, 150 units, and then the minimum density requirement of 15 dwelling units per acre. The 80%, 10% comes from the affordability. So the town rather is not required to have a requirement for affordable units. Many towns are choosing to do so. So HLC has provided that you can have 10% of units affordable at 80% of AMI. If you want a deeper level of affordability or a higher percentage, you have to do something called an economic feasibility analysis. And that analysis is designed to show whether or not your town's market can support that deeper level of affordability.
So will it be 10% of 900 or 10% of 1294?
For within the station area?
Because the total units you're getting is more than 1200, right?
Yes, we clarified this was a topic before the special town meeting in November. I believe I said this at special town meeting, we had it in the fact sheet that was the total number of units. HLC has since clarified that it's based on the minimum, not the total. So the 10% or the 20% for the acres is based on the 50 acres, not the total number of acres. The 20% for the units, it's based on 750 units, not the total number of units.
So can I
Yeah.
check on behalf of the planning board, the issue would be not an abstract number, but the actual proposal before us, whatever number, and we anticipate that these numbers may not be achieved by any given project, but any given project would have to have 10% affordable.
I guess I'm talking about the amendments that is going to be proposed. And the language is very clear on that.
I believe it is. I don't know, what do we think?
Should be.
Yes.
Based on the total, the count versus the actual units that.
Yep.
are in-
The
Well, we refer to our inclusionary zoning,
zoning
yeah,
bylaw,
which is what that's about.
So this process has had the benefit of our consultants, and I always feel like we've had a wonderful advocate because Emily did work with the state on developing the compliance model. So when there is a question, she knows the answer inside and out. We've had town council supporting the process all the way through drafting the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. We have gone through it
And
several times.
yes, and HLC, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, has been responsive when we've had questions. So if I don't know the answer, I'm reaching out to them as well. There are a number of resources online as pre-adoption letters that I mentioned earlier. So
That's good. I just want to make sure that it's clear to the town folks who will be coming to the town meeting.
thank you. Thank you for the question.
Anything else? We're gonna,
Well, I want to say, Emily, I'm not sure I should thank you for your work on this whole thing. I mean, it's quite something, but anyway.
Well, as I said, I hope it is useful to the town, and if, as you think, as we approach town meeting, if there's any other information you think we should be giving to town meeting, I appreciate hearing that through Lauren And we have time to adjust.
We have another crack at this.
Exactly.
Did you have any questions?
This-
No, but there's another question. Respond now.
Mark Rambacher, 205 Hartwell. I have some questions on the actual bylaw language. On section 173-253 E. It says the maximum impervious surface is 50%. That should probably be qualified to say per what? Is it per acre, per lot, per?
Those are lot dimensions, so it's per lot.
Because the other things we're talking about per acre earlier.
Okay.
I have another question on F. It says the maximum density shall be 6 dwelling units per acre. But then you show that you can build a 12-unit building. So how do you build a 12-unit building if you can only put 6 on 1 acre?
Because most of these lots are greater than 1 acre.
But this says 6 units per acre. So no matter how you divide, if a 12-unit building is going to be larger than an acre?
Oh, I see what you're asking. So if you have a 2-acre parcel, for example, which you don't in this case, the smallest is 10, but say you have a 2-acre parcel, you're allowed 6 dwelling units per acre, you would be able to have 1 building of 12 units, or you could have smaller buildings, and I think that was the
But
key.
the way it's worded is it says 6 per acre. It doesn't say 6 average per lot. Average of 6 units per acre
Right.
per lot.
So for example, the King Street Common District has a density of up to 20 units per acre. And it doesn't. It calculated across the entire district.
Okay.
Um,
And then in your picture, you showed with that had that little pie chart that said you did the 6 units, one said 6.7 and the other one said 6. So that 6.7 doesn't jive with this 6. When you
So
when you
again,
take out the
difference.
excluded.
Right, that's the difference of the results of the model are on the right-hand side, and what's in the zoning is on the left-hand side. We'll make that more clear.
Yeah, I'll add that.
But when you add those up at 181, are you saying that what are you, there's still 181,
Yeah.
20.2 divided by 121 divided by 20.2.
It's not, back to your point. So what you have there is the total number of acres.
Yep.
The density is calculated on what's called the density denominator.
Mhm.
And the density denominator is the total number of acres less the excluded land.
Right,
I'm not showing that up there.
right, but this,
Right,
But
so
the-
when you see, sorry, let me just finish. So when you see 16 dwelling units per acre, it's not 121 divided by 20.2.
Mhm.
It's 121 divided by the density denominator, which I'm not showing up there, and it's less than that. I can put density.
I understand that. So you're saying the density denominator is less than 20.2, but
Right.
that then gives you more than 6 units per acre. But this says 6 units per acre here.
Correct.
So you're not agreeing with each other.
No. Yes, those two numbers don't agree. That is correct. However, your zoning limits it to 6 dwelling units per acre. Your zoning doesn't refer to the excluded land. That's something that's only to the compliance model. So the compliance model is taking out the excluded land and showing you that it's 6.7 dwelling units per acre without that excluded land. But if somebody came to build on this, their requirement is 6 units per acre. And the 6 units per acre is going to be on the 20.2.
So I'm just trying, I am fine with all of this,
Right.
right? I just want to make sure that when we go to town meeting, it passes, right? So that we need to make sure the language and the understanding is crisp. So that people don't, I mean, if I picked up on this in the quick reading, then other people are going to have these same questions. So we need to be ready to answer them. And I mean, the impervious one is an easy fix to add a
Right.
qualification to it. These other ones, we're going to have to just be really clear that we have the right answers to, because it's not clear to me the way it's worded. What you're saying and what it's worded don't necessarily match.
I did one of the very first presentations I did this to this board I had sort of different colors for different components of the model. I'm wondering maybe if I reconstituted those and added that up. Let me think about that because I see exactly what you're saying and why it'd be
This
confusing
board is
when you
much
brought it
easier to
up.
sell than town meeting.
Yeah.
That's. So,
All right,
Maybe
yeah.
we should call it buildable land. We keep calling it
I don't think
excluded
so,
land.
because,
It's what can be built on.
but that would be a higher dwelling unit per acre. I would think that
No,
if
that's
there's,
the 12.
Let me sort of take a crack at it and pass it by you, and maybe it gets passed back by the board with a slide that explains the numbers. I think that would be wise, hearing your questions, hearing what's already been brought up. I think that would be a wise thing to do.
but back to your original comment about the 12-unit building. My understanding of this zoning bylaw and all of our zonings, we have a parcel.
Mhm.
The entire parcel has 6 units an acre, but that's an aggregate. There might be parts of the parcel that has 12-unit buildings on it, but they could certainly, it doesn't say that you can't, well, maybe it does say that. I don't think so, but it doesn't say that you can put a 12-unit building on 1 acre. But, I understand your
You wouldn't
point.
be able to do that. So, and it is a good point. I'm glad you brought it up. So if you've got, well, round the 9.9 up to 10, because the math is easier, right? It's 1 acre zoning. So you could have somebody subdivide that into 10 acres, right? Each acre would be allowed to have 6 units. So they're not putting up a 12-unit building. They're putting up, 2 3s or, a 2 and a 4 or whatever. The only time you get a 12-unit building is if you have more than 1 acre in that parcel. And the intent was to keep the scale of the buildings much lower. I think certainly what we heard in the first part of the conversation last spring and summer was that people did not want the really big buildings. So that was.
I'm agreeing with all of that. It's just the way
Yeah.
it's worded, it doesn't, the two seem to be in conflict with each
Okay.
other, so.
We'll look at that. Thank
So,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a comment, based off of the questions that were just asked, based off of what Mr. Yates said earlier around the numbers. Being able to get this passed means to be able to answer folks' questions. So I have a suggestion. And that suggestion is, what if you created the presentation that you plan to give? What if you did a dry run with a half dozen residents who haven't been engaged and get their feedback on the presentation? Because if there are folks from, all around town that have not been engaged in this process, that might be a good opportunity to be able to get feedback that would be helpful for the town meeting. So I offer that up as a suggestion. The second thing I wanted to highlight for everybody, I guess I have a question. Are we going to go through the bylaw? Because I had a couple of questions as well.
Why don't we,
But
I was gonna say, since it's not a public, when we're doing it informal, why don't we do it at the public meeting?
Well, I would suggest we start now.
Okay.
And,
All right.
I'd love to hear questions now,
Yes.
so we are able to answer them before the public hearing.
so finishing up on what I just started saying about the pre-presentation idea, I do appreciate the fact that the state put together these FAQs that you attach to the back of the bylaw. I think that's really helpful. Something else that I saw online was that our neighbor Concord put together something as well for their residents. And that is something else that could be helpful as a guide for our residents to be able to understand some of these intricacies, because as you know, some people want all the detail, other people don't want any detail. No, I can't find it, but it is available and I can forward it tomorrow, and in case that is also something you might want to consider doing.
Great, thank you. And we can talk about, is there a dry run opportunity? We can think about. I like that idea.
You had some bylaw questions.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Now let Lena go first.
So the bylaw questions that I have, 173.255 G is design guidelines, and my question is, When and how would we do this if not now? I heard the reticence at our last meeting around trying to add in design guidelines. So what would that look like? In other words, would there be a time frame? Would we have to wait until this is approved? I'm just trying to get a sense of when those design guidelines could be.
That would be up to the board to schedule when you work on those.
But it doesn't require a town meeting vote or, and I thought it was the intention to use the guidelines developed for the 40R,
Right,
Right.
right, yeah,
which were nice.
yes.
Mhm.
And so we'd be going through those again.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is up to us. I didn't know if there was a deadline by which we had to have them completed or anything. My next question is 173-255H, the waivers. I just really had heartburn about this particular item in the proposed bylaw. And here, so it reads, upon the request of the applicant and subject to compliance with the compliance guidelines, the site plan review authority, which is this board, may waive by majority vote the requirements of this section, and the section is site design. Or excuse me, not site design, sorry. The section is general performance standards and criteria, and it just really causes concern that we would just waive that. And so given the fact that that's not in the MBTA guidelines, I don't know where that came from.
It's in the sample zoning, pretty much close to that same wording in the sample zoning.
Is it? Because I
Yes.
didn't put it in there.
It should be under, I think it's, the section of the sample zoning is development standards, G development standards, should be the last one in that. So I'll tell you the intent of it, and then the board can obviously discuss what they want to do about it, but in looking at some of these guidelines, and it's something I've done in other zoning, is sometimes you get a site with really weird boundaries, really weird topography, strange relationship to other, we're going to cut things up a little bit differently sometimes. And the waiver is a chance for the board and the applicant to be able to work together to a better design solution for something, maybe there's a reason that one of these can't happen. Most of these are pretty standard, so I'm not seeing it used a lot for these, but there's maybe some of the connections, for example, that might be a little bit more of an issue. So it's in there. It can be used just by, the applicant can't walk up and say, I don't like the way the standard reads, so you have to agree to this. That doesn't work. It also doesn't allow the planning board to say, we don't really like your design. And we think this is a better one and we must use it. It requires a negotiation, but I can certainly see that there are some boards that are not using it. So I think that's up to the planning board, whether they want it or not. But I'm pretty sure it's development standards, and I'm pretty sure it's G. So you can't find it just like
Yeah, in the town's experience, when we don't have, when we haven't included the ability for waivers in the development process, that's when we get into sticky situations where it could be a better development if only the board could do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And this allows for that flexibility.
Yeah.
The one I was thinking of is in order to save the tree in front of the Yancey, that's going to be a waiver. So it's something, it could be as simple as that.
And as a former planning board member, I certainly ran into situations where our hands were tied, and if we could have just provided some additional flexibility, we could have gotten a better project, but we couldn't. So,
And there's always they have to persuade the majority of the board. It's not like you ask for a waiver and you get it. There'd have to be some criteria to. I have to say, from personal experience, I was dealing with this today with another town, another city, and where the letter of the bylaw just didn't apply to this particular site. It's a historic building, it was blah, 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 da, da, da. And you show the zoning officer, the building commissioner or something, oh, that looks great, but it doesn't follow the bylaw. And what does follow the bylaw does not look great.
right. But I think there is one important piece to this is that it does not allow a waiver to the dimensional standards. So the board, an applicant can't come in and say, well, I see your height restriction of 2.5 stories, but really I want to give you a 5-story building. You don't have the ability to waive that because that's a dimensional requirement. Not, and I think that is, I'm glad you brought this up because I think that's really important for the public to know. I've had questions from other communities where people come up and say, well, doesn't as of right mean that they can build whatever they want? And the answer is absolutely not. Has to meet the zoning. So you don't have the right as a board to waive the dimensional standard.
So what else would it not allow you to waive?
It's just 173-255, which is the general performance standards and criteria.
So
you
each
can't waive
outside
parking.
that section.
Yeah, anything outside of that section, you can't waive.
And it does include the standards that the board, a finding that the board has to make in order to permit, to grant a waiver.
Right.
So it doesn't waive density, it doesn't waive parking, it doesn't waive height.
It doesn't waive
Setbacks.
Yeah, it doesn't waive setbacks, absolutely.
I have a question.
Thank you.
So, but there is a process for variance, right? Someone can apply for a variance.
The normal zoning rules for, through the ZBA would still apply on that. So,
So it's not absolute.
So
I,
we have to
do you
choose
have
this general-
experience with variances? Because state law is pretty strict, and even though we're maybe more flexible than most, it wouldn't, I can't see how it would apply to one of these projects.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Houston.
I have a question unrelated to what you guys are talking about. Rob Houston, 55 Jennifer Street. It goes back to this slide, actually. My question is the confusion of this slide is that you're showing compliance with those two things. My real question is just a philosophical question. It is, if we're trying to market this and sell it to get it passed at the town meeting, the real question I have is, how deep do you go into proving to the town that you are in compliance with the state law? In other words, I don't know whether the 6.7 versus the 6 is relevant to our meeting and town meeting. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't want, my suggestion would be you don't go overboard trying to convince the town that our zoning bylaw is in compliance with the state and they will approve it. We are trusting our board to present us with a bylaw that will get past the state. Right? So I'm concerned that the more we try and prove to people we're in compliance, the more confusing we get because we end up with puzzle pieces that look like that. Because I don't think that's even necessary.
What about, actually, Lauren, can you go to number 15? What about that one? That basically says if you put them all together. it
Well, I think
works.
that's gonna scare the crap.
Yeah, I wouldn't, no, I'm sure, I agree with Rob.
At the end of the day, why do we care?
Okay.
Right? What I care about actually is in an overlay district, whether or not the underlying zoning or the what's been approved for King Street Common is actually gonna be limiting so that they can't come back later and build up to that. That's what my concern is, as it being an overlay.
Okay, understood.
And
So,
if you present that, that's why I now have that concern,
right,
because you're showing me that they could.
He's right. The King Street Common shouldn't really be into this discussion at all, other than the fact that we're gaining 600 units from King Street Common. Leaving it that, we need another 150, and this is where we're putting it. King Street all by itself works. Let's not go too far with King Street Common. It's already approved. Something's gonna happen over there. We still have issues that we're dealing with through Plnbrd and everything else. We get 600, we get the benefit of 600 units there. We need 750, we need 150. That's all we're looking at. It's gonna be 181 because of the way the zoning works and everything else. So we're trying to keep in compliance with the state, leave it at that, rather than like, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's like the hot dog things. We like hot dogs, but we don't want to know what's in them.
I also have one more question, if I could. But anyway, that was my proposal, is to just make it simpler and not try to prove to us that you've done your job. The second question I have is you've talked about wanting to keep it in whole numbers at 5 or 6. I'm just curious, when we're dealing with the parcels we're dealing with, right? We're not dealing with 1 acre parcels or 5 acres. We have a 10 acre parcel and a 20 acre parcel. My question is, why can't you do 5.5?
So I can't remember all the iterations I did. You're absolutely right, we could. I was trying to keep the numbers simple by having them round numbers.
So you simplified it in areas.
Simplified in one way, but not the others. So I think we need to retape our presentation now, Maren.
I'm only asking that because
Well,
that is a
would-
question I could see come up for
Yeah.
purposes of getting that number down to below 1 acre.
So I would suggest that 6 is gonna be a lot easier to review and enforce than a fraction.
And you could be right, because I guess the landowner could sell their property and split it up and all sorts of things can
Yes.
happen later, so.
Yes, in theory, all of those could be split into individual 1 acre lots and developed that way. The other reason is I did want a little bit, because these are, the math is a little bit less precise with these large lots, and I did want a little bit of room just on the Littleton, because we're not changing the zoning for King Street and the Village Common on dimensionals. That's what the model spits out for the zoning there. I did want to have a little bit of a cushion.
I think
on the station
that's
side.
perfectly
Yeah.
reasonable. And
Okay.
you might even go so far as to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you might even go so far as to say, I anticipate, right? I mean, because that is a possibility, not just a possibility, probably a likelihood that the state's gonna knock it down. Right? And again, this is all, I'll try to help you in how you frame your presentation.
I appreciate
That was
it.
all.
Thank you.
I want to piggyback on Rob's point, because as a planner, in applying to the state, you have to include all this information on King Street Common. But from a town meeting point of view, that's a done deal.
Okay.
We have 600 units. We're lucky that we had previously approved that, or else we'd be, then we would have to go into detail about all this stuff. So, and maybe you keep some slides that have more detail apart. Have an auxiliary slide deck if you feel like, the discussion is going a certain direction, but it will confuse people.
Okay.
They're seeing all these numbers. They'll see 1,233 units and their heads will explode. And, anyway.
Okay, anyone
Thank
else
you.
have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
So we'll see you on May 2nd at
No, so that's quite enough. We'll talk that later, but we'll renotice and rehold the public hearing on May 2nd at 6:15 in room 103, the town offices, and we can have that as long as short as.
Yep, okay. Sure. Maybe we'll do a dry run for town meeting. It's only a couple days after that. Great, thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. We're back to, and thank you for indulging us, letting us go first. We have a 6:05 informal discussion of 245 Foster Street.
Thank you again for all your time. This is an informal presentation. It's meant to inform you of the studies we are making for the development of the 34 acres of 245 Foster Street.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
The first development option that you see here is for industrial redevelopment. Industrial redevelopment in Greater Boston is probably the strongest sector of the real estate market. There are two major components. One is pretty well known to you, or would be warehousing. Companies like Amazon, DHL, UPS, The other is probably foreign to you. It was foreign to me. And your proximity to Devon's, makes this startlingly appealing to someone like, our company. What's happening is the generation of companies that we hope would develop to deal with energy and climate change are developing. So if you go over to Devon's, there's a company called Commonwealth Fusion. It's building a major facility. It is hoped that it is the innovator in fusion technology. If you go into Somerville, there's a company called Form Energy, and they build long duration batteries for utilities. Problem with energy is storing it, and they think they've figured out how to store it. These companies need with what are called advanced technology manufacturing facilities. They are not in the existing stock of industrial, usually not in the existing stock of industrial R&D buildings, like the IBM campus would qualify. They usually need enormous amounts of power. A typical one is 8,000 amps. We know of one user in Woburn that we're working with, it's 20,000 amps. This is going to be a big issue, by the way, if we want these companies, because the grid is not equipped to do this. That's another matter. They need very tall buildings on the ground floor, very robust. These companies are moving things around that are enormous in some cases. Sister companies are robotics and GMP. Right now, we calculate there are 9 million square feet of such requirements extent in the market. They usually have to be built. They usually are very difficult to retrofit. Of that 7 million, only 2 million are life sciences companies. They are drug manufacturing facilities. Most lab business is dead and gone for probably the next 10 years. There are two models that encounter on industrial development. One is a very large footprint, particularly for a warehouse. Although, you have a company here, by the way, that is one of the more fascinating. It's called Lab 9. Called Lab 9 Modular. It's the first company I've seen to actually produce modular units. Whether it'll be successful or not, they're building in Somerville. They use structural steel and concrete, which you would not think of as modular pieces. Their building's probably about 300,000 square feet. In fact, I think they're located right down the road. And I've been in their facility. And that's the kind of thing that's happening now. Companies need enormous buildings. They often will be, a 300,000 square foot building. The warehouses often can be that. So that is the dominant trend. There's only two financeable products in real estate in Greater Boston today. One is that, and the industrial, particularly this form. The other is multifamily housing. You can't finance, and you will not be able to finance, I don't think, for quite some time, office buildings, hotels, retail buildings. I left the first or second largest contractor in New England a few hours ago. And basically, their inventory is empty, which, by the way, is a collateral piece of damage that we're going to have to look at because the construction is going to suffer major layoffs. So that's one option. And we've hired Jacobs Engineering to help us. We're building one of these in Woburn at the Anderson Regional Transportation Center. It's 183,700 square feet. It's 42 feet tall. Why is it 42 feet tall? Because that's what it takes. I'll give you an example. A robotics firm really doesn't want to fly its test drones outside. What they want to do is monitor it with sensors. They want to film it. And that needs a 40-foot tall place. Throughout much of Greater Boston, they can't fly it outside without FAA approval. So they'd rather have it indoors. And you find this in industry and after industry. Heavy duty, power hungry, tall floors. And by the way, very, very hungry for young talent, which is a huge problem. So we've got Jacobs on the engineering side. One of Boston's premier industrial brokers is a guy named David Stubblebine. I asked him to be here tonight. He can't. But the other major brokerage houses such as Cushman and Wakefield. This is a very viable auction, and one, given the disfavor of the town towards multifamily at the station, I suspect this is the emerging option for us. We think this is a great site. We're going to go ahead under any circumstances. And if our original game plan isn't something the town likes, then that's fine. Go ahead to the second one. This is, one of the things is that we've been approached much more than we ever were before. Being a large multifamily builder, a lot of, senior companies, particularly from out of state, have approached us and said, what can we do? Most of them up until now have had unrealistic expectations of what it takes to get something done in terms of land costs, land availability. And so you'll find them a lot in the South Shore, of course, but you'll find them sprinkled around here. That's changing. People call it the silver tsunami. And what they mean is at some point, guys like me are going to actually have to give up and go someplace to live because they can't take care of themselves. And that's true. The baby boomers are sticking it out in their housing, but I don't know how long they can stick it out. So there's an enormous demand. This shows the site's capacity for 100% senior living. It does include, and this is kind of an examination point. This shows several buildings that are independent living. And these are sometimes called age restricted, although your zoning doesn't specifically, but these are buildings that are people, 55 and older. But people who are healthy and independent living and don't need any particular assistance. The E-shaped building is a care building. There are 3 levels of care: assisted living, nursing care, and memory care. Memory care, unfortunately, is a very fast-growing segment. So this is an integrated 100% senior development. So this, I don't know how much it really uses the MBTA, but it would be, I think it's, these are very attractive. The problems of trying to step out of owned homes keep getting larger because usually the people who own those homes have favorable mortgage terms. And it's really hard to unlock that and say, I'm going to go get a smaller house that costs the same amount of money, and I'm still going to get a mortgage. So the option of rental or condominiums, some of these could be condominiums, for that population is growing in popularity. Most of the time, a lot of the time, it's a 6 to 9 month population with 3 months south of the border. It often looks for design in the units that does allow kids, their kids, grandkids, or their adult kids to come and visit. I just moved into a not unlike development like this, and we have 2 guest rooms. One is a guest room, and the other is called Jack's room. He'll be here 2 or 3 times a year. He's in New York, but that's Jack's room. Of course, he's the baby and the boy, so he gets prerogatives. And that actually shows up. That's what people really want. So this is what it would look like on a fully integrated senior build. We have hired a consultant called Health Trust, and that is a national consulting firm that consolidates all the data and analyzes this. And we've hired a national firm that specializes in senior care and senior operations, and that's called Walker and Dunlop. And so they're looking into this in a parallel track with our industrial investigation. Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, this is just 100% independent senior living. So it's a variation on the other one. I tend to think that in this direction, if it were to be totally dedicated to seniors, that it would be something where we would try to do an age in place option where it's age in place, where there is a mixture of independent living, not assisted, then a mix of other things. That is sort of the logic. It's not clear to me how well the 2 ends of the industry participate together, but that's something we're digging into now. But the site works fine for that. It's completely effective, just as it would be with a component of nursing care and memory care. Okay. This is an intergenerational campus. It devotes 10 acres to the MBTA communities. This is conventional multifamily. And then it devotes the balance to senior living. It could be senior living as an independent living, or it could be senior living still with a age in place memory care nursing component. That's a refinement that we're going to have to look at. You can see it also in these slides that we look at townhouse type development on the option of the front 4 acres. And those could be rentals or condominiums, and they could lean seniors and other things could be done. That has not been the main body of our study. Our study has been on the industrial option and on what can be done with the site as a senior option if the town prefers not to put its MBTA communities component here. The one thing I like about this particularly is that the population between age, say, 55 and 75 kind of dislikes this option nowadays. And the reason is they're really not thrilled about being surrounded by their age peers. You know, they want to do more than pickleball. They want to go to a brewery. And the idea here is that we would more deliberately plan it than you see here, so that there would be independent amenities for the seniors, including potentially the age-in-place nursing care, but there would be shared amenities as well. Now, the seniors definitely like to have an in-house, in-building food option. And the 24 to 44-year-old population could care less about that. Seniors may want to have not a full kitchen, maybe something less than a full kitchen, whereas younger people, cooking is a part of the lifestyle. Both want dogs. So the nature trail here and a dog park are essential. Part of these studies for residential development have to look at how you handle wastewater. You see up there that there is a wastewater component. Actually, it's not labeled. And that has to be carefully placed in terms of handling wastewater from the wastewater station development. So that's a great option. We would definitely prioritize this option if the town was to look at this as their MBTA communities piece. By the way, I guess I'm venturing beyond my mission here, but the figures that are being thrown about of 1,000, 2,000, 100, 11, 1,200 units, those are just sort of calculation numbers. They have really nothing to do with reality. If over the next 10 years, you execute 600 units of Napoli and 150 units here, I very much doubt whether you'd be executing many more elsewhere. It's just not the capacity of the areas. The sites don't work. There's competition for the sites. It's not, go back when I entered the industry, you'd never come out and look at a site and say, gee, this is a great industrial site. No, it's a great senior housing site. No, it's a great multifamily site. We don't have any land. And you may look around and say you think you have land, but you actually don't. There's not a lot of land. And the issues complicating land, like wetlands, infrastructure, sewer, water, and other things are very substantial. So, I think this is a fairly realistic portrayal of where you're headed. It's not a couple thousand units. And in fact, I think that unfortunately, because of today's financing markets, going to be a pull in terms of the time it will take to execute any of these multifamily projects. The returns that the financing industry now requires are just like home mortgages. At one point you could sign a home mortgage at sub 3, and now you can't get a home mortgage at much like sub 6. And it's identical to that. And in Boston, the ability to build these projects with our labor force, with the cost of land, the cost of infrastructure, it's almost impossible to meet those numbers. We will eventually, someday, and that's what we do. So, and we're particularly good at it. We have managed to get around the financing markets a couple of times in the last couple of years. We got the 440 units in Wakefield. That's a joint venture with the largest owner of housing stock in the nation, Equity Residential. But it's heavy lifting. So we love this option, and we love the industrial option too. We'd love to work with you on this if we are given the privilege of doing so.
Thank you. Any questions and concerns? All right. Great, thank you. Yes, sir. Mr.
Michael,
Sullivan.
11 Hawaiian Street. Quick question. I just want to flip this around. Which of the industry sectors show the greatest promise for employment hiring in the next 5 years?
The sectors that I was speaking about, the brokers, real estate brokers call it different things. No, leave the seniors out.
For obvious
No,
reasons.
it's not senior.
And,
It's no senior.
Good. So you're just, so you're citing those as examples of high employment industries.
Well, I don't know that we have high employment industries,
Keep going.
but the higher employment industries are the ones that are emerging to tackle new serious problems. Climate change problems, energy storage, metal fabrication. Metal fabrication is one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions. Greening concrete. Concrete manufacturing is one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions in the planet. And which kind of irritates me because when I go in to talk with people about commuter, not in this site, but in other sites, where we have to build a garage to serve the cars, and someone says you need 2 or 3 cars per unit. Well, we're just wasting concrete. Not waste money, it's also wasting carbon emissions. But there are different companies that are tackling these. There's some competitors. Usually you'll find 3 or 4 in the field. You'll find Bill Gates and the top venture capital people. Their employment levels vary. And I know that like Form Energy, which is the long duration battery company in Somerville, they have 300,000 square feet now. They have a fairly hefty workforce, but I'm not sure what the workforce would be, say, to support a robotics testing facility. Because some of the testers are going to be robotics themselves. So the key thing about those industries is that's where economic future lies. If you are right now a municipal leader, I'm not speaking to Littleton, but maybe like Boston. I don't know where your tax money is going to come from next year. I built a building in Newton, and it was for a while, it may still be the most valuable building on 128. It's next to Riverside Station. It's a reconstruction of the Jordan Marsh warehouse. It's 500,000 square feet. And Alexandria bought it for 245 million 2 years ago and sold it last year for 107 million. So life sciences is eroding. They're also offloading a lot of functions so that they're narrowing down. We just got to get the scientists together. We can do this other stuff remote. We can farm this out and subcontract it. So the companies we're talking about, the emerging companies. The reason we're here is that because the people that fuel those companies are all 24 to 34, and they're leaving. They're leaving because they can't afford the housing. You may have seen it in the Globe today. They're just leaving. It was about 1,000 a week. That's why they're bothering with this. That's why they're bothering you, because there's no place to house. If you're older, there's a way you're going to get housed. You know, whether it's senior housing, owning your home. Affordable housing is getting a lot of money from the federal and the state. But if you're, and if you earn more than 200,000 a year, you'll find a place. But if you're a young nurse and you're earning 110 for the household, you know, if you go to Mass General, you ask the nurses where they live. It's Salem and it's Rochester and they come in at off hours. We just don't have the housing. That's what this is all about. I mean, whether that weighs into your consideration or not, it's up to you. But this is why we're bothering with this. And as to how this particular scheme goes over with them, I don't know. Because what they need to do is get some housing built. And 65% of these younger people can't buy a house, they rent. And I know
Cheaper for them to rent.
they don't have the equity, they can't cut the mortgage. My daughter lives in Salem. I thought that would be pretty cost effective. She went out to buy a house, it was $600,000. She said, Dad, this is real rough. I don't know if I can afford the mortgage. I said, I'll teach you how to do it adjustable. We got through all that. She called me back and says, I can't bid. So what do you mean you can't bid? She said, the broker said they got 21 offers, that or above the asking price, some all cash. They can't, so they leave. And with hybrid remote work, makes it easier. Now you can live in North Carolina and you can work for State Street Bank. So that's the problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Lauren, just to clarify too, or to confirm, I guess, this site is currently zoned industrial. So the only 2 options that could currently be built here are 1 and 2, correct? So it would be the industrial and then the assisted living, senior
housing.
Could you also do, okay, so even independent living?
Mhm.
Yeah, as long as it's senior, okay, just
Well,
one.
then
But the last one obviously could not be because that would require
A zoning change to get.
the zoning bylaw,
To the
which we already, yeah. All right, I just wanted to
No,
make sure
we could rezone it to the townhouses. We could rezone it to residential for that.
we wouldn't have to take that to.
No, not town meeting, no.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, we have to.
Yeah,
At town
Right.
meeting, but we could rezone it, not.
Right,
At
okay.
any
So I
time.
just wanted to clarify for anybody listening that
Something's
this
gonna go
is,
there.
yeah.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll continue to April 2nd, May 2nd. 6:15. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. We adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.